What is up, guys? Welcome back to Will of DDT. My name is Anonymous. This is my cat. And today we are going to be going over my Pluffy deck profile. For those of you who haven't played it, Pluffy is a very linear, very straightforward deck. So to be honest, I'm going to keep this video short and sweet. My list is going to be just about the same as anybody else's. From one list to the next, there's maybe 4 to 6 cards worth of difference. But yeah, this is a very linear, very straightforward, but extremely effective deck. And I will just be going over my card lists and, just the reasons that some of these different choices are in there. But if you want to see an actual gameplay guide, like how to play Pluffy against different matchups and win those matchups, then definitely check out the video in the description down below. I'm going to leave a link to my Pluffy gameplay guide where you actually get to see me play matches with the deck. If you're more interested in just seeing the cards for now, then go ahead and keep watching this video. But after that, if you want to see some actual gameplay, then definitely head over to that next video to check that out. But yeah, like I said, guys, it's going to be short and sweet. My Pluffy list is not going to be that radically different from anybody else's, so we'll just jump right in. Alrighty, guys, let's get right into the deck profile over here. So, for those of you who might want a reminder, this is our Purple Luffy leader. Love this freaking PSA artwork here. It's so sick. But activate main. Once per turn, you can add a card from your life to your hand. And then if you've got 3 or more Dawn, you get to add 1 Dawn. So basically the 3 or more Dawn clause is just to prevent you from using this on your first turn. So starting on your second turn, you get to take 1 life, get 1 active Dawn. That is probably the simplest, no gimmicks, no strings attached Dawn ramping ability in the game, which is one of the things that makes this leader so powerful. Dawn ramping is usually designed to be kind of an inconvenient effect, because if it were too easy, you'd be able to get to like freaking 10-drop boss monsters way too fast, which honestly Pudding kind of does, but that deck falls apart for some other weaknesses. But in any case, this leader is just going to be able to get an active Dawn every turn at the cost of taking 1 life, which actually ends up as more cards in hand, so it's not even a total downside. So yeah, basically the game plan with this deck is extremely linear. You want to just play units on curve and just keep ramping Dawn so that you have the amount of Dawn needed to play your next key unit. First turn, you want to play Law. Law is going to be your searcher. On play, he looks at the top 4 cards of your deck and grabs anything that's a Straw Hat Crew or Heart Pirates card, but it has to be 2 cost or more. Do keep that in mind. There are a few targets in this deck that, unfortunately are not searchable off the Law. Gum Giant. But yeah, basically this Law is going to be really handy for when we are searching for our just pretty much anything in our deck besides those few cards. So this is going to be a real handy card, and we want it on our first turn. Second, we've got Zorojuro. This is also a searcher, except he's an actual offensive unit as well. On play, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, and you get to add a Straw Hat Crew card, purple Straw Hat Crew card, and then put the rest at the bottom of the deck. So this one does not have any cost limitation, except this guy does search the top 5 as opposed to top 4, but it can't find Heart Pirates, which, surprise, surprise, is somewhat relevant in my build. But you can find pretty much all your Straw Hat cards, which is nice. But he does cost 4. 4 for a search is pretty expensive if you're just using him strictly to look for something. Mainly you want to play this guy on curve, so you're developing an attacker as a body and also, getting to your next play. If you don't have Zorojuro, so again, turn 1, you're going to play Law. Ideally, you want to go first with this deck pretty much all the time. There's so many scenarios where I thought, like, oh, maybe I want to throw my opponent off their curve and, keep them from their 10-drop for a little longer by going second. No, you always want to go first. The effectiveness of this deck going first versus second is just such a crazy spike. That's not to say it can't do well going second, but pretty much its plays are going to be so much more aggressive. You have so much more pressure if you're the first one to get the attacks. So here is, like I said, turn 1, play that searcher. Turn 2, you're going to be at 3 Dawn, activate leader ability, get up to 4 Dawn, play Zorojuro. That's going to be your second searcher. If you don't have the Zorojuro, you can play Bond Clay instead, which is nice because Bond Clay is going to on play ramp an active Dawn. So you get 1 active Dawn card from this, so it's effectively kind of like using your leader ability twice in 1 turn. You effectively get to go up to you know, instead of being at 7 Dawn, your next turn you'll be at, I'm sorry, excuse me. Instead of being at 6 Dawn, your next turn you'll be at 7 without having to take 2 life. So that is really good. And then obviously Bon Clay, when attacking, gets to copy the power of any of your opponent's cards, which is a really neat effect. It's likely going to get removed if you leave it on board for too long, so be careful about just like leaving it there until your opponent drops a boss monster. But regardless, it is a very strong and threatening card. Next up, we've got Luffy Taro. So, like I said, turn 1 Law, turn 2 Zorojuro, or if you don't have it, Bon Clay. Turn 3 Luffy. You are going to activate your leader ability to take another life and play this Luffy Taro for 7 Dawn. Or if you played the Bon Clay, then you won't need to activate leader ability without having to take another life. You can just play this guy right away. So 7 cost Luffy, Dawn -1 on play. You get to play a Straw Hat type character that is 5 or less from your hand. So this is really neat. You get to just spam a really wide, really scary board. This guy himself is a 7/8, and the ideal target that you want to play off of him is Sangoro, who is a 5/6k unit, and then when attacking, he gets to draw a card. So you're just developing two bodies, one medium size, one pretty big body in a single turn. Next turn, Sangoro is going to swing, just draw you a card and gain back hand size. There's a lot of cards in this deck that allow you to go net neutral hand size, which is very nice. So Sangoro being able to draw a card on attack is just really nuts. And Luffy Taro just being a freaking 8k is really damn good that you get out, you know, effectively 2 turns early, or a turn early. And then next up, we have the 9 cost Rush Luffy. This is one of our boss monsters in this deck. On play, you get to return 1 or more Dawn if you'd like, and then he gains Rush, and then you draw a card. So another example of net neutral plays. You get to play a boss monster who replaces himself in hand. I think that's kind of a first in this game. Maybe I'm missing something, but like boss monsters that, I mean, maybe Moria has some ways to do the same thing effectively, but yeah, keeping your hand size the same while playing a 9 cost 10k rusher is freaking sick. And this guy is just a really, really good card that just turns up the aggression. And our alternate boss monster, if you don't see that, because again, this deck's main advantage is in going wide, not going tall, so we don't want to just load up on these. We don't want like 4 ofs for our boss monsters, just 2 is enough. So we've got 2 Luffy and we've got 2 Lin Lin. 9 cost, -1 Dawn, and you get to trash a card from your hand, add a life. So that kind of mitigates one of the weaknesses of this leader, which is that he's taking his own life pretty recklessly. So you actually get to heal with 9 cost Lin Lin, and then you also get to take one of your opponent's 6 or less monsters and throw it into their life. In certain matchups, you absolutely do want to do that. Just because you're giving them more life doesn't mean that that's a bad thing to do. Removing key units off the board is absolutely favorable in a lot of situations. So you get to remove one of their units, heal 1 life, and establish a 9k power unit on board. Very, very good. So this is the kind of standard like ramp I've shown here. You want to play 1 cost Law on turn 1, Zorojuro or Bon Clay on turn 2. Turn 3, you're going Luffy Taro into Sangoro, which you should hopefully have if you got 1 or both of your searches. So you want to go Luffy Taro into Sangoro turn 3. Turn 4 is going to be either your Luffy or your Lin Lin. That's the standard, but turn 4 is kind of where it goes up in the air. This is very linear. This is exactly what you want your first few turns. This part is where it starts, like, you know, you have to play to the situation that you're currently in. So we will start going over some of the cards that might come up now once you get to that late stage of the game. Okay guys, so next up, the card you might want to play here is Sanji. So ideally, this is kind of a game ender card. Sanji is really nice for just pushing for lethal. 7 cost on play, you get to -1 or more Dawn, and then you get to rest one of your opponent's 6 or less characters, and then Sanji gains Rush. He is a 7/7 Rush that gets to remove one of your opponent's blockers. That is really, really good for going for lethal. So if your opponent's showing up, they're trying to establish a bunch of blockers, and you have a very scary board, Sanji's a great way to just push for the game. So this is something I'd usually play after I've established one of these boss monsters. So, you know, you have a big scary board, you play Sanji, and then you're swinging with your Zorojuro, your Luffy Taro, your Sangoro, your boss monster, and your Sanji in a single turn, ideally. And yeah, that is usually going to be able to win you the game. Pretty freaking scary card. Next up, we have our blockers. So like I said, you may come into some situations where, you know, after you've gotten to this point, after you've done the Luffy Taro into Sangoro, you're kind of in a more scary situation in terms of your life. Maybe your opponent swung at you a little too aggressively and you need to establish some blockers. So this deck does need to run a good amount of defense to back up its hyper offense. So we are running 3 copies of the 5-cost Kid, just a 5-cost 6k blocker who nets you back some Dawn with your Dawn minus effects. Also, if you're going second, not a bad card to drop on turn 2, because if you're going second, your second turn you'll be on 4 Dawn, you activate your leader ability, you get up to 5 Dawn, and then you have enough to play the Kid, and then your following turn, you'll be at 7, you play your Luffy Taro, he's gonna -1, and then Kid is gonna bring that Dawn right back. So you get to swing a little higher with your leader, you get to swing 6k instead of 5k, which is actually pretty freaking handy for your against your Shanks matchup. That is going to be really good for you. So Kid is pretty good. If your opponent forces you to go second, you might actually want this earlier game. Otherwise, it is a blocker just to shore up for the late game, and a 5-6 is a pretty respectable stat line, and it's got counter. So this is a very easy 1k to give up if your opponent is just poking at your life a lot. Next up, we have 3 copies of Onami. This is a 4-cost 2k blocker, which is why I don't really like running her. Sometimes I almost just want to cut one of her out for an extra 2k in the deck, but I mean, she proves herself useful because, again, this is another card that is going to allow you to maintain net neutral hand size. Onami is a blocker, but on play, if you've got 8 or more Dawn, which, again, you want to be playing her late game after you've already done your standard curve, she gets to trash 1 card from hand and draw 2 cards. So it's kind of in the reverse order, but it's a queen effect. You're going net neutral because you're drawing 2. You're losing 2 from hand by losing the Nami and another card, and then you're gaining 2, so you're just keeping your hand size regulated and establishing another blocker that your opponent has to deal with if they're trying to go for game. So really good, and she is a Straw Hat character, so she is playable off the Luffy Taro. If you want to establish another big body that can swing the following turn while also establishing a little bit of defense, it's not a bad play to... After already having Luffy Taro number 1 and your Sangoro on board, you can play Luffy Taro number 2 and put an Onami out with it. Pretty solid play. Now getting into our 2k counters, we've got Franosuke, who is a 2k. He's a 5-cost 4k rusher. If you attach a Dawn to him, he can rush at life. You're probably never going to use that effect, I'm going to be honest with you. This guy is mainly here just to be a searchable 2k. That is about it. Next up, our very playable 2Ks, we have got our 3-cost Uso Hachi. This card is nuts. 3 cost, 3k. On play, if you've got 8 or more Dawn, you can rest one of your opponent's 5 or less blockers, which is, or I mean just 5 or less characters, which is insane. Again, great way to push for lethal. Just spend 3 Dawn, play this guy, rest your opponent's blocker, whatever it is. 5 or less is pretty much hitting all the relevant blockers in the game, and then, you know, now that they can't block, you can use all your units on board and all your remaining Dawn to just push for lethal. So very, very handy 2k. You want to probably save this 2k for last. If you've got, you know, a variety of 2ks in hand, this is probably the one that you want to hold on to. But there's also an argument for this guy over here. We've got 4 copies of our 2k counter 6-cost blocker Sanji. This is also an extremely playable card, so usually want to hang on to one of these and one Uso Hachi because I do play this guy, believe it or not. If you've got 2 less Dawn than your opponent, 2 or more less Dawn than your opponent, you can play this guy for only 3 cost. A 3-cost 6k blocker is so nuts. So sometimes I will deliberately try to use the effects of like Sanji or Luffy well, not, yeah, sometimes I'll try to use like some of these cards you'll notice say Don minus however much you want. You can minus 1 Don or you can minus more Don. If I see that I have a Sanji in hand, sometimes I will deliberately minus more Don than I need to with these guys. Instead of just doing -1, I'll do -2 or maybe -3 in some scenarios, just to set myself far back enough that I can play a Sanji for only 3 Dawn next turn. I want to be 2 or less Dawn than my opponent, so that I can play Sanji very economically. So yeah, I really do like that play. You can kind of play, you can play with the gimmick of this deck of minusing more Dawn than needed in order to play this Sanji very efficiently. So I really like this card. Again, 3 cost 6k blocker, or worst case scenario, it's just a 2k counter, which is really, really good. And it's searchable. And by the way, if you are at 2 or more less Dawn than your opponent, if you're satisfying Sanji's condition to become a 3 cost, he can be played off of Luffy Taro. He counts as a 5 cost or lower in hand, so you can actually play Luffy Taro and play this Sanji blocker off of him, which is really nice to know. And then last but not least, for our characters, I am running 2 copies of Law. This is a 4 cost 5k blocker. Again, just more ways to show up. We've got 4 blockers in Sanji, 3 blockers in Kid, 3 blockers in Onami, and 2 blockers in the form of our Law. That's plenty of blockers to be able to sustain ourselves in the late game. And this guy is really useful if your opponent has 7 or more cards in hand. You can Dawn -1 and you can make them lose 2 cards at random. Sometimes you snipe some really good stuff, sometimes you get some mediocre stuff. Regardless, you are reducing their hand size while establishing a defensive unit, which is really, really nice. And he is searchable off of the 1 cost Law, because the 1 cost Law can search Heart Pirates as well as Straw Hats. So this guy being a Heart Pirate makes him searchable by Law, which is really neat. And then finally, we've got the GOAT, man. 1 cost Gum Gum Giant. This card is insanity. It is so stupidly good. You keep 1 Dawn up, and then your opponent just constantly has to worry about you having a 4k buff that does not lose you any hand size. Again, another card that allows you to go net neutral hand size, and for a counter event, that's crazy. So you leave 1 Dawn up, you have to do a Dawn -2, which essentially doesn't matter. You'll be gaining them back next turn, so you're using this late game after you're already on 9 or 10 Dawn, so Dawn -2 doesn't matter that much. But yeah, you Dawn -2, your leader or one of your characters gets a 4k buff for that battle, and you trash 1 card from your hand in order to use this, and then you draw 2. So you're losing the counter event, and you're losing another card from hand, and then you're gaining another card and another card from your deck. So it's net neutral hand size, which is insanity. A plus 4k buff that does not reduce your hand size is just crazy to me. I can't believe Bandai made this card, and it just gives us leaders so much defensibility. It's extremely good. I mean, again, in the late game, if you find that you're kind of behind, your opponent has overwhelmed you with their aggression, you can just keep dropping blockers and keep leaving a Dawn up for Gum Gum Giant. If you're pretty confident you can win the next turn, sometimes you leave up 2. I have countered out of, just because this deck has so many 2Ks, and just because you have this card, I have countered out of a 6k and a 17k in the same turn once, just by leaving 2 Dawn up and just having enough 2ks in hand. I just baited my opponent into going for game instead of developing. I was like, yeah, I'll take that last life, and then they just went all in. They went 17k with their Rayleigh, and I was like, yeah, cool, I'll just casually counter out of that. You had to -4 Dawn, of course, but next turn I was winning, so in those situations it's worth it. So sometimes you even want to keep up 2 Dawn to use 2 of these in a single turn. Yeah, guys, that's the deck. You're basically establishing a super wide board, super aggressive early on, and later on when you need to just survive so that you can just keep poking at their life repeatedly every single turn, you are going to establish blockers and leave up Dawn every single turn for your Gum Gum Giants. I hope you guys enjoyed this deck profile. This is a super fun deck to play. I enjoy it, like I said, very linear, but also very, very satisfying and fun. So I will be leaving a link to my gameplay guide in the description down below. So if you're interested in seeing how this deck actually pilots and plays different matchups, definitely click that link in the description, and leave a like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you want to see in our future content, guys, and we will see you in the next video. Peace.